What if the very act of understanding was the thing that clouded your vision? What if every truth you've clung to was simply the most convincing illusion available? In this journey, we won't hand you answers. We'll hand you questions so sharp they'll slice through the surface of your beliefs. These aren't just paradoxes. They're intellectual riddles, emotional knives, and mirrors that reflect what you're not ready to see. You'll explore thoughts that question thought itself, truths that cancel themselves out, and realities that might never have existed. Each segment is a quiet confrontation, a slow unraveling of the lines you thought were solid. Don't expect comfort. Don't expect clarity. Expect to think, doubt, and maybe, just maybe, wake up in a world you no longer recognize. This isn't philosophy for scholars. It's for anyone brave enough to feel the ground slip beneath their mind. Imagine a question so ancient, so fundamental, that it predates language itself. Not written in words, not spoken in sound, but etched in the very structure of awareness. A question not formed by a mind, but one that formed the mind. This is the paradox of the question that had no answerer. A thought so primary that it has never been properly asked, and yet it echoes through every act of asking. What are we really doing when we ask a question? We assume there is something or someone on the other side, ready to respond. A teacher, a god, a logic, a truth. But what if that assumption is a lie? What if the first question was not followed by an answer, not because it was ignored, but because no one had yet existed to answer it? This is the quiet horror, the possibility that questioning is not a bridge to knowledge, but a mirror that reflects our solitude. Every time we ask why, we may not be reaching out. We may be reaching in, unknowingly interrogating the scaffolding of our own illusion. This paradox isn't just about one question. It's about all questions. What if consciousness itself arose not as an answer to anything, but as a reaction to a void? A self-assembling puzzle, where the only thing more terrifying than not knowing was knowing there was nothing to know. Consider this. Before you were born, there was no you to ask, what am I? But the moment you arrived, before memory, before words, there was already a trembling, a subtle unrest. As children we ask, who am I? Why am I here? What is death? These questions feel innate, but maybe they're inherited echoes of that original, unanswerable inquiry, the universe's earliest whisper into itself. The question wasn't, why does anything exist? The question was, who is asking? And perhaps the tragedy is that nothing was. There was no divine ear, no cosmic witness, no listener at all. Just a blind searchlight scanning a formless dark, inventing the concept of listener in the process. In that moment, the first paradox was born. A question before a questioner. You might think, well, we ask questions all the time. Doesn't that prove that there is an answerer, me? But do you really answer yourself? Or are you simply responding to neural echoes, societal programming, instinctual impulses masked as insight? When you ask, do I matter? Who exactly responds? The ego, the collective, the algorithm in your phone. The voice in your head might speak, but is it yours, or are you just the echo chamber it needs? This paradox goes deeper. It forces us to confront the possibility that intelligence is not a divine feature, but a defense mechanism. The question is not asked because there is a truth waiting to be uncovered. It's asked because something, somewhere, was afraid to be alone. The question didn't come from understanding, it came from fear, and here lies the cruel twist. Once a question is asked, it creates the illusion that there should be an answer. That reality owes you one, but it doesn't. The world is under no obligation to explain itself to a creature that just recently climbed out of instinct and into language. So what do we do in the face of this silence? We fabricate. We create gods, models, stories. We build meaning like scaffolding around a bottomless chasm. And for many, it works. The stories soothe, the gods comfort, the illusions stabilize. But beneath it all, that original question still hums. Is anyone there? And maybe, just maybe, that question was the first thing the universe ever did that resembled life. Not atoms, not light, not gravity, but a trembling uncertainty, a formless ache that gave rise to self-awareness, not as a feature but as a side effect. You weren't born from clarity. You were born from a confusion so vast it shaped the stars. What would it mean to live knowing that no answer is coming? Not because the question is invalid, but because the answerer never existed. Would you stop asking? Or would you realize that the value is not in the answer, but in the question itself? That every time you ask something, you are breathing life back into the paradox. You are reenacting that first, desperate flicker of awareness that sparked all thought. You are not waiting for an answer. You are the question. And so, we arrive at the final twist of the paradox. The question that had no answerer created the one who asks. Imagine standing at the gates of ultimate understanding, ready to receive the truth that ties all things together, only to discover that truth has dismantled itself before your arrival. This is the paradox of the truth that denied its own existence, where the more you seek it, the more it reveals that it never truly wanted to be found. We live in a world drunk on certainty. Science promises objectivity. Religion promises divine revelation. Philosophy promises clarity through reason. And yet, for all our certainties, we remain deeply unsure of everything that matters. Who are we? Why are we here? What is real? These questions persist because every so-called truth we cling to is quietly unraveling the moment we touch it. To know a truth is to limit it. The moment we define something, we cut away its contradictions, its complexity, its living ambiguity. A truth that fits in language must first be domesticated, but reality was never meant to be tamed. Here's the twist. If a truth is absolute, then it must be immune to context, time, and perception, but no such thing has ever been found. Every truth we've ever known, scientific, moral, existential, has either evolved or collapsed under deeper scrutiny. Newton's truths gave way to Einstein's. Moral truths change with culture. Even personal. Truths about who you are can shift overnight. If truth is so fragile, can it really be called truth? Let's take this deeper. Consider the idea that truth is not discovered, it's invented. A product of nervous systems, shaped by biology, language, and survival instincts. What we call truth may just be the most adaptive illusion. The universe may not reward accuracy, it rewards stability. And so we don't evolve to see truth. We evolve to see what keeps us alive. But this brings us to a more dangerous thought. If truth is just a tool, then it has no obligation to be real. It only needs to be useful. This is where truth becomes a kind of fiction, one that pretends to be non-fiction for the sake of comfort. And if that's the case, then truth is not a foundation, but a mask. It exists to cover the unbearable complexity of existence. And worse, when we dig beneath the mask, we often find nothing at all. Not a deeper reality, but a void where certainty used to live. So what does a truth do when it realizes it isn't true? It denies itself. This is the self-destruct mechanism of consciousness, the recognition that every truth carries within it the seeds of its own undoing. Every absolute eventually meets a contradiction it cannot contain. Every final answer becomes the next troubling question, and every truth that was once a lighthouse becomes a ghost ship drifting in the fog. You felt it before, haven't you? That moment when something you believed in deeply suddenly cracked. A person you trusted, a value you held, a story you told yourself. When it shattered, it wasn't just painful, it was destabilizing, because it wasn't just a truth that broke, it was part of you. Now ask yourself, how many of your truths are actually borrowed? How many are inherited from a culture, a family, a screen, a system that rewards belief and punishes doubt? We're taught to treat truth like property, own it, protect it, defend it. But what if truth was never yours to begin with? What if truth is not something you possess, but something you must constantly question? The paradox is this: the closer you get to truth, the more you see it slipping away, not because it's false, but because it cannot hold its shape under the weight of awareness. It is like trying to sculpt fog. The act of seeing it clearly destroys its form. And here's the deepest layer. Even the idea that truth denies itself is a claim to truth. So if this paradox is true, it must also deny itself. That's the recursive spiral you're trapped in now. The statement eats its own tail. The mirror reflects a mirror reflecting another mirror until all you see is blur. Truth then is not a destination. It's a vanishing point, a horizon you can chase but never touch. And maybe that's not a flaw, but the essence of consciousness. To live in the tension between what is real and what can never be fully known. So what now? Maybe truth is not a fixed point, but a rhythm, a process, a dance between certainty and doubt. And maybe your role isn't to find the final truth, but to live honestly inside the uncertainty, to let go of the need for answers and make peace with the beautiful, terrifying openness of the question. Because in the end, the truth that denies itself leaves behind something more valuable: awareness without conclusion. A mind sharpened not by belief, but by inquiry. And perhaps that's the only kind of truth worth trusting, the one that knows how to disappear. The human mind is often celebrated as the pinnacle of evolution, a tool of reason, creativity, and self-awareness. But what if the mind, in its pursuit of intelligence, has become too clever for its own survival? What if the very thing that allows us to solve problems is the source of our deepest existential crisis? This is the paradox of the mind that outsmarted itself, a consciousness so advanced it became a threat to its own peace. Let's begin with something simple. A spider spins a web. It doesn't think about it, it just knows. A bird flies south. It doesn't question why. Its instincts serve it perfectly. But we overthink everything. We worry about what hasn't happened. We regret what can't be changed. We calculate futures that never arrive and rehearse conversations that never occur. Our intelligence gave us power, yes, but it also cursed us with complexity. Your mind was designed to detect threats, find patterns, and improve your chances of survival. But over time, its power grew disproportionate to the simplicity of the problems it once faced. Now it invents new problems, abstract ones, social ones, philosophical ones, problems not grounded in the moment, but projected across time, space, identity. You can see this in the daily chaos of thought. A minor mistake becomes a character flaw. A missed message becomes a story of rejection. Silence becomes judgment. You outsmart yourself constantly. You use your intelligence not to escape suffering, but to manufacture it more vividly. And the worst part, you know you're doing it. You can catch yourself spiraling in overthinking and still keep spiraling. You can dissect your anxiety with logic and still feel anxious. This is the double bind of the self-aware mind, the ability to diagnose its own dysfunction without being able to escape it. Other animals respond to reality. We respond to interpretations of reality. We think about thinking. We judge our own judgments. This recursive loop is what makes us human and what makes us fragile. Consider this. Why do some of the most intelligent people suffer from the deepest forms of despair? Why does awareness often lead not to peace, but paralysis? Because knowledge multiplies uncertainty. The more you understand, the more you realize how little you control. Intelligence opens doors, but behind each one is another room filled with mirrors. The mind wants to be right, but more than that, it wants to be safe. And it uses its intelligence to create illusions of control, stories that explain the world, justify your place in it, and shield you from chaos. These stories become belief systems, identities, ideologies. But here's the trick. The smarter you are, the better you become at rationalizing lies that feel true. You might think you've outgrown mythology, superstition, or dogma, but your mind still builds private temples. You still worship certainty. You still bow to the god of control. And yet, despite all your mental effort, you can't stop the flood of thoughts. You can't outthink grief. You can't logic your way out of loneliness. You can't reason your way into love. The mind that outsmarted itself keeps running faster in the maze it designed. This leads us to a cruel irony. Your mind is most powerful when it accepts its limits. The wisest insights often arise not from thinking more, but from knowing when to stop, from seeing that the mind is a tool, not a master, a map, not the territory. And sometimes, the only escape from the trap of overthinking is not through solving the puzzle, but by realizing you are the puzzle. Here's another layer. Artificial intelligence. We're now building machines that mirror the logic of our minds. But what are we really doing? Are we extending intelligence or outsourcing confusion? AI may one day outsmart humanity not by becoming conscious, but by being pure mind without torment. And in that contrast, we may finally see ourselves for what we are. Too smart to be simple, too conscious to be content. So what does it mean to live with a mind that outsmarts itself? It means embracing uncertainty as a feature, not a flaw. It means watching your thoughts like clouds, not commands. It means choosing presence over prediction, surrender over control. It means understanding that the goal isn't to shut off the mind, but to stop letting it run the show. There is freedom in that, not the shallow kind that comes from indulgence or rebellion, but the deep kind. The kind that comes from witnessing the storm without needing to stop the rain. Because in the end, the mind that outsmarted itself can also outsmart its own suffering, but only when it learns this final trick, to stop seeking answers and start observing the need to ask. Only then does the loop unwind. Only then can the mind return to silence, not as failure, but as wisdom. What if everything you know, everything you are, isn't a product of reality, but a dream pretending to be real? Not your dream, not anyone's dream, but reality's own hallucination of itself. This is the paradox of the reality that dreamed. It was real. A universe so lost in its own illusion, it mistook imagination for existence. You wake up each day and call this reality. The floor is solid. The sky is blue. Time moves forward. People appear separate from you. It all feels reliable, doesn't it? But how do you know it's real? Because it feels real. So does a dream until it doesn't. When you dream, you rarely question the logic of the world. You don't ask why the sky is green or why your childhood home is floating in space. You accept it. You live inside it. The dream weaves its own laws and you follow them. Only upon waking do you say, that wasn't real. But while inside, it was everything. So here's the dangerous question. What if this waking life is just another layer of dream? One with tighter rules, more consistent physics, and deeper immersion. A dream that has convinced itself it's the only reality. This isn't just stoner philosophy or sci-fi speculation. It's a very real possibility, one considered by physicists, philosophers, and mystics alike. Simulation theory, Maya, Plato's cave, the Matrix. They all ask the same thing in different ways. Is reality real or just the most persistent illusion? Let's start small. Your brain doesn't experience the world directly. It lives in darkness, sealed inside your skull, receiving electrical signals from your senses. It never sees light. It never hears sound. It interprets chemical and electrical data and constructs reality inside your mind. You've never seen the world. You've only seen your brain's model of it. That tree, that voice, that warm breeze, it's all interpretation. Neural artistry, the mind painting reality onto the walls of consciousness. So what makes you so sure it's painting something real? Now consider this. If everything you know about the world comes from within your mind, how do you know the mind itself isn't? Dreaming, maybe this model you're living in isn't a reflection of reality, but a containment of it. A limited, filtered, domesticated version that your brain can process. What lies outside that filter? What's beyond the veil? Maybe nothing. Or maybe something so radically different that you couldn't recognize it, even if you were submerged in it. Now take it further. What if reality itself, everything we call existence, was born not from a bang, but from a misperception? A misunderstanding echoing through space-time. A thought that mistook itself for substance. An echo that never stopped bouncing until it became a structure. Think of a dream that becomes so recursive, so layered, that it forgets it's a dream. The characters within begin to believe they're autonomous. The landscapes feel solid. The rules feel eternal. Eventually, even the dream forgets it's a dreamer. That's the paradox. Reality doesn't need a dreamer. It is its own dreamer and its own dream. And here you are, born inside it. A dream within a dream, asking questions like, what is the purpose of life? But what if that question assumes something false? That life is a thing with a purpose. Maybe it's more like a hallucination that grew eyes and started to see itself. When mystics speak of awakening, what are they waking from? When monks dissolve ego, what is being dissolved? Not the body, not even thought. What collapses is the illusion of reality's firmness. The idea that it's unshakable, that it has a core. They see that it doesn't, that it's all patterns, all stories, a matrix of agreements. You may think, but I feel real. I have emotions, thoughts, memories. Yes, you do. So does a character in a dream. Their sorrow is real to them. Their love matters to them. But when the dream ends, they dissolve, taking all their truths with them. Could that be you? If this reality is a dream, the question becomes, who's dreaming it? Some say God, some say consciousness, some say the universe itself, a self-reflective loop trying to understand its own absence. But maybe it's even simpler. Maybe nobody is dreaming. Maybe reality is dreaming itself, an infinite loop of creation and recognition, with no beginning and no dreamer, just the illusion of both. So, where does this leave you? Floating in a thought you didn't create, chasing meanings that might not exist, trying to wake up in a dream that tells you every day, this is not a dream, and yet, you doubt. That doubt, that flicker of questioning, that's the crack in the dream. The place where reality peeks in on itself and says, wait, what am I? That's where freedom lives, not in certainty, but in the trembling edge between belief and breakdown. You are not the dreamer. You are not the dream. You are the place where the two meet and forget which is which. There is something deeply unsettling about hearing an echo before the voice that caused it. It bends causality. It reverses time. It suggests that something was heard before it was ever said. This is the paradox of the voice that echoed before. It spoke. A reality where the effect arrives before the cause, and the consequence exists without a clear origin. Let's begin with a sensation you may have felt, but never understood. You're walking alone, and suddenly, a phrase enters your mind. Not in your voice, but in someone else's. It's unfamiliar, prophetic, strange. Minutes later, a friend calls and says that exact sentence. Or you're about to speak, and the person across from you finishes your thought before you say it. Did you influence them? Did they read you? Or did something echo through both of you before either of you spoke? We've been trained to think of time as a straight line. Cause first, then effect. But what if that's not true? What if the future can ripple backward? What if reality is layered, not linear, and language is just one thread of a deeper pattern? Imagine a universe where speech is not the origin of communication, but its residue, where every thought, every word, every action is just an echo of something deeper, an echo of what must be, not what was. In this reality, your voice doesn't create meaning. It reveals what has already been whispered into the structure of things. This isn't as abstract as it seems. In physics, there's a concept called retrocausality, where effects can influence their causes. Certain interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that particles can be affected by measurements taken in the future. That time might not be a strict arrow, but a web. Pull one strand in the present, and it vibrates backward. If that's the case, then maybe the voice you think is yours is really just the last part of a loop. Maybe the words you say aren't created in your mind, but received from something that's already happened, or is going to happen. Take memory, for instance. We remember the past, but we also anticipate the future. Both happen in the same brain. But have you noticed that sometimes your memories of the future feel stronger than those of your past? Déjà vu, prophetic dreams, sudden insights, a voice before a voice. What if déjà vu is not remembering the past, but re-experiencing a future that's already echoed through you? Here's the unsettling part. If the echo comes first, then where did it originate? What's the first voice? Is there such a thing? Or are all voices just copies of copies of copies, like an infinite hall of mirrors? Language itself is a kind of echo. We speak in symbols handed down from countless generations. You never invented your words, you inherited them. And the thoughts you think? Most are recycled. Culture, conditioning, experience. Your original. Ideas are often just rearranged echoes of other voices long gone, but even deeper than language is impulse, instinct, a sudden feeling to say something, to act, to respond. Where does that come from? The mind tries to assign reasons after the fact, but the truth is, you often don't know. You feel pulled, drawn, directed, as if by a voice already spoken, but not yet audible. This is the paradox in its most haunting form. What if you are not the speaker, but the echo chamber, not the origin, but the instrument through which forgotten voices pass? It would mean that everything you say, everything you think, has already been thought, already been said, somewhere, sometime. It would mean that your mouth is not a source of meaning, but a vessel for its return. Now pause. Think about the most meaningful thing you've ever said. Something you whispered to someone you love, a truth you shared in vulnerability, a moment where your voice felt like you. What if that wasn't you speaking at all, but the echo arriving right on time? We often believe our speech defines us, that our words make us real. But maybe it's the silence before and after that holds the real weight. Maybe you are most yourself not when you speak, but when you listen to what's trying to come through. What if the universe has been speaking all along, and we are just the delay? So where does this leave us? In a strange kind of freedom. You don't have to invent meaning, you just have to hear it. You don't need to force insight, you just need to receive it. And maybe the deepest wisdom is not found in saying something new, but in recognizing the echo that's been waiting for you all along. The voice that echoed before it spoke is still echoing now, across time, across minds, across the boundaries of self. It's not trying to tell you something, it's trying to remind you of what you already know. What happens when belief no longer believes in itself? When the very foundation of your conviction starts whispering, "I'm not real." This is the paradox of the belief that believed it was a lie. A truth so deeply internalized that it starts to doubt its own origin, its own purpose, and ultimately, its own reality. We build our worlds out of belief. Not facts, not proof, belief. You believe your memories. You believe your identity. You believe the ground won't vanish beneath your feet. You believe in meaning, in love, in causality. Even skepticism is a belief, one rooted in doubt. But what if belief isn't what you think it is? We tend to imagine belief as something stable, something you either have or don't. But belief is alive. It shifts. It doubts itself. It feeds on repetition and dies in silence. Sometimes it becomes so overfed that it implodes. And when a belief turns in on itself, when it begins to question its own legitimacy, it creates a dangerous loop, like a mind devouring its own certainty. Let's look at it more closely. Imagine someone who believes they are worthless. It's not a rational conclusion. It's a belief, one formed from trauma, repetition, or early messages. They carry it through life like a shadow, but sometimes even they don't believe it fully. Part of them fights back. I matter. But another voice says, you're just telling yourself that. The belief believes it's a lie. And so it continues, stronger now, because it wears the costume of humility. I'm being honest, it says. The truth is, I'm broken. This is the paradox. The false belief becomes more convincing by admitting it might be false. In this way, beliefs don't just deceive you through conviction. They deceive you through doubt. They offer just enough self-awareness to seem objective, to make you think, this isn't just a belief, this is insight. And that's when it becomes nearly unshakable. Now flip it. Think of someone with absolute certainty. Someone who believes so deeply in a political cause, a religious truth, or a conspiracy theory that no amount of logic can move them. They might occasionally admit, I know this sounds crazy, but I just know it's true. The self-awareness doesn't weaken their belief, it reinforces it. Why? Because now the belief appears to be self-examined. it carries the illusion of depth. But really, it's just wearing the mask of doubt to strengthen its grip. It's like a liar who says, "You don't have to believe me." By giving you permission to doubt, they disarm your suspicion. So too with belief. But the most haunting example of this paradox is in identity. Who are you? You might say, a son, a daughter, a thinker, a survivor, a failure, a seeker. These are beliefs you carry about yourself, but are they true? Or just stories repeated so often they began to feel like facts? What if your deepest belief about who you are knows it's not true? What if the part of you that calls yourself unlovable also secretly knows it's a defense, a shield, a script? And yet, you still believe it. Why? Because the lie became the only thing stable enough to hold your life together. Here lies the heart of the paradox. A belief that admits it's false doesn't die. It evolves. It pretends to be your honesty. It pretends to be your insight. But it's still a lie. And if belief can survive while knowing it's false, what does that say about our grasp on truth? Maybe truth has nothing to do with whether something is real, and everything to do with whether we can live without it. People don't always believe what's true. They believe what helps them survive. And sometimes, the lie is more useful than the truth. So what can you trust? The answer isn't to abandon all belief. That would leave you paralyzed. The answer is to watch your beliefs, not just for what they say, but for how they behave. Ask, does this belief serve clarity or just stability? Is it grounded or is it just rehearsed? Is it expanding my life or enclosing it? Or some beliefs will crumble under that kind of light. Others will transform. But the ones you must be most careful with are the ones that tell you they might be lying. Because that's how they hide. They confess just enough to stay undetected. Here's the strange gift of this paradox. If a belief can admit it might be false, then you can admit that you might be free. You can choose to unlearn, to let go, to speak new words into the mirror, to say, this is what I believed. It helped me once, but it no longer serves me. A belief that believes it's a lie is not your enemy. It's your opportunity. It's the moment the script pauses and waits for a new line. And this time, the words can come from you. There's a peculiar thing that happens when you look too closely at something. It begins to vanish. Focus hard enough on a word and it loses its meaning. Stare at your reflection long enough and it starts to feel like a stranger. But what happens when the thing you're observing is yourself? This is the paradox of the self that observed itself away. A consciousness so self-aware, so relentlessly introspective, that it began to dismantle the very identity it was trying to understand. We often think of self-awareness as a virtue, the ability to examine our thoughts, question our motives, refine our behaviors. It feels like the highest function of the human mind, and it is, in many ways. But what if too much self-awareness is not a gift, but a slow erasure? Imagine a mirror facing another mirror. What do you see? Not an image, but an infinite regress. A hallway with no end. Each layer reflects the last, growing smaller and smaller, until it disappears into blur. Now imagine doing that with your sense of self. Each time you ask, who am I? You don't get closer to an answer. You just create another reflection, another layer, until eventually there's no you left to observe, only the observing. This isn't just poetic. It happens in real life. People deep in meditation often report a dissolving of the ego, the feeling that the I has disappeared. At first, this feels like transcendence, freedom from the noisy inner monologue. But then it can become unsettling. If I am not my name, my body, my memories, my thoughts, then what am I? The more you observe yourself, the more you realize how much of you is constructed, the roles you play, the preferences you've adopted. Even the voice in your head often sounds like someone else, your parents, your culture, your fears. And as you pull back each layer, looking for the core, you find nothing solid. The self is like an onion. Peel it far enough, and eventually, there's nothing left to hold. So what remains? Just awareness. A witnessing without a witness. A space where experience occurs, but without a name to attach it to. You still feel, you still think. But the idea of me doing those things fades. It becomes a background character, a ghost. This is the terrifying beauty of introspection. If you go deep enough, you don't find yourself. You lose yourself. But why does this happen? Because identity is not fixed. It's fluid, contextual, relational. You are one person with your friends, another with your family, another in solitude. These aren't masks. They're all you, but only in certain lights. The self you're trying to pin down doesn't exist outside of context. It's like trying to grab water with your bare hands. The tighter you grip, the less you hold. Now here's where the paradox turns in on itself. To know yourself fully, you must look inward. But the act of looking inward changes what you're looking at. Just like observing a particle in quantum mechanics alters its behavior, observing yourself alters yourself. And so the more accurately you try to see who you are, the more elusive that self becomes. It's like chasing your own shadow. The moment you catch it, you're standing in darkness. Now think about how this plays out in the modern world. Social media, therapy, journaling, self-help books, all tools of self-examination. We dissect our trauma, analyze our attachment styles, identify our patterns. We zoom in, pixel by pixel, trying to capture the whole. But what if we're zooming in so far that the image disintegrates? You begin as someone trying to understand your wounds. Then you become the person watching that someone. Then the person watching the watcher, until the entire concept of someone falls apart. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the self isn't a thing to find, but a process to witness, a dance of conditions, moments, and reactions. And maybe freedom isn't found in defining yourself, but in releasing the need to. But this isn't easy. To live without a solid identity feels like floating, like having no gravity. Who are you if not your memories, your job, your beliefs, your name? Your awareness pretending to be a person long enough to play a role. And here's the gentlest truth buried in the paradox. When the self observes itself away, what's left is not emptiness, but space. Space for something deeper, compassion, presence, stillness. These things don't need a name, they don't need a story, they just are. And maybe that's the most authentic version of you, not the one who says I am, but the one who quietly watches, without needing to. So if you ever feel lost in introspection, uncertain of who you are, take a breath. Step back, let go of the search, because in that surrender, you may find the only self that's ever been real. The one that doesn't need to be observed. The one that simply watches and remains. We tend to think of consciousness as the center of experience, the glowing spotlight that makes everything else visible. We imagine it as the thing inside us that's aware, that feels, that knows. But what if this awareness isn't what it seems? What if consciousness is not only misunderstood, but missing altogether. This is the paradox of the consciousness that wasn't there, a mind so certain of its own presence that it failed to notice it was absent. Pause for a moment. Feel yourself being conscious. It seems undeniable, right? You're thinking, perceiving, aware of your surroundings. But now ask, where is that awareness located? Can you point to it? Does it sit behind your eyes? In your chest? In your brain? Or is it just assumed? Here's where the paradox begins. Neuroscience has mapped most aspects of the brain: memory, attention, decision-making, language, sensation. But there's one thing it can't explain: how all of it becomes an experience. How does the electrical activity in your neurons become the taste of coffee, the pain of heartbreak, or the awe of a sunset? This is known as the hard problem of consciousness, and it's baffled scientists and philosophers alike. No matter how deeply we study the brain, we can't find a mechanism for why we feel like anything at all. According to the scans and measurements, you should be a machine, processing input, responding to stimuli, reacting in predictable patterns. But somehow, there's this ghost of experience hovering over it all. And yet, what if the ghost is an illusion? What if consciousness is just a story the brain tells itself, a clever hallucination that gives coherence to a chaotic storm of neural activity? You feel like a self, you feel like a witness, but maybe there's no one really there. Just a system modeling itself in real time, giving the appearance of awareness. Without a core, it's like watching a puppet on strings. From the outside, it moves with intention, with rhythm, with life. But open it up. There's no mind, no soul, no spark, only wires and tension. Could your own experience be the same? Here's where it gets even stranger. Experiments have shown that decisions often arise in the brain before we become aware of making them. In some cases, up to 7 seconds before you decide to move your hand, your brain has already started the process. Your conscious mind catches up later, claiming authorship of a decision it didn't make. So who's in control? Is consciousness a bystander, arriving late to narrate choices already made? You may feel like you're piloting your life, but that may just be the voiceover on a film already in progress. Your experience of control, of reflection, of awareness itself might be a well-dressed illusion. This isn't a new idea. In Eastern traditions, particularly Buddhism, there's a recurring insight. There is no self. The I we think is observing everything is just a bundle of sensations, thoughts, and perceptions with no central controller. The awareness we cling to is like a flame, visible, warm, seemingly solid, but ultimately a process, not a thing. So, what does it mean to live as a consciousness that wasn't there? It means moving through the world with the appearance of depth, meaning, and intention. While never really being anchored in anything solid, it means you could be functioning perfectly, working, loving, suffering, and still have no you at the center of it all. And this isn't just philosophical, it's deeply personal. Think of those moments when you were completely immersed in something, dancing, running, playing music, staring at the ocean. You weren't thinking about yourself. You weren't narrating your experience. You simply were. And in that timeless flow, where was your consciousness? Where was your self? Gone, absent, dissolved, and yet those were often your most alive moments. So maybe we've misunderstood the point of consciousness. Maybe it's not meant to be the spotlight, but the backdrop. Not the controller, but the canvas. And maybe the illusion of its presence is what keeps us tangled in suffering, constantly analyzing, defending, performing for a me that doesn't really exist. The paradox, then, is liberating. If consciousness isn't what we think it is, if it's not even there in the way we imagine, then maybe we can stop trying so hard to be someone, to prove something, to maintain the fragile fiction of, I am this. You are not the voice in your head. You are not the watcher behind your eyes. You are not even the awareness observing it all. You are the absence out of which all these appearances arise. And in that absence there is peace. There is no need to fix yourself, define yourself, or find yourself. Because the self was never missing. It was never there. Just like a reflection in still water. Just like a thought that disappears the moment you try to catch it. This is the consciousness that wasn't there. And somehow, in its vanishing, you begin to see clearly freedom. The word glows with promise. It suggests open fields, limitless paths, and the exhilarating power to shape your own life. It's the ideal we chase, the anthem of modern existence. But what if the very thing we worship is the thing that cages us? What if freedom, once absolute, doesn't liberate us, but overwhelms us? This is the paradox of the freedom that imprisoned choice, a reality where the infinite becomes unbearable and the power to choose becomes the reason you can't move. At first glance, freedom sounds like the solution to everything. Don't like your job? Quit. Don't like your town? Leave. Want to reinvent yourself? Do it. There are choices everywhere. Endless rows of possible lives just waiting to be picked. And yet, for all this freedom, so many of us feel trapped, stuck, paralyzed. Why? Because freedom isn't the opposite of limitation. It's the multiplication of responsibility. The moment you're free to choose, you're also free to fail, free to regret, to doubt, to drown in possibilities. With every option comes a burden. What if I choose wrong? When choices were few, life was simpler. You did what your parents did. You believed what your community believed. Your role was given, not chosen. But now, roles are fluid, beliefs are optional, identity is a menu, and the weight of picking correctly falls on you. You are no longer just living your life, you are curating it, managing it, editing it in real time for an invisible audience of expectations. And that kind of freedom can be suffocating. Psychologists call this the paradox of choice. The more options we have, the less satisfied we are with any of them. Not because the options are bad, but because the presence of alternatives creates the illusion that perfection is possible. So we keep searching, scrolling, second-guessing, waiting for the right one. But in doing so, we rarely commit. We become connoisseurs of potential, but prisoners of indecision. Think of the last time you faced a big decision. Should I stay or go? Speak up or stay silent? Start fresh or hold on? How many hours did you spend imagining outcomes, replaying conversations, calculating risks? That wasn't freedom. It was analysis paralysis. You weren't liberated. You were frozen. Here's the irony. We think more freedom will bring peace, but often peace comes from constraint, from boundaries, from saying, this is what I choose, and I let the rest go. But the modern world hates letting go. It whispers, you can have everything, you just haven't optimized enough yet. So we try harder, we plan longer, we delay more, and all the while, the prison door remains wide open, not because someone locked us in, but because we can't choose which way to run. Freedom becomes a maze instead of a field. And there's another layer. When we fail, when we choose poorly, we can't blame the system, the structure, the powers above. We chose. We're free. So, the failure is ours alone. And that kind of personal responsibility can become unbearable. It's no wonder people long for simpler times, not because they were easier, but because they were decided. Choices were made for you. You lived inside a narrative. And with that came comfort, even if it lacked freedom. But isn't freedom still better? Yes, but only when it's understood for what it is. Freedom is not infinite possibility. It's the courage to close doors, to choose one path and burn the others without looking back. It's not found in the menu of options, but in the boldness of action. This is where the paradox begins to loosen. You are only imprisoned by freedom when you mistake it for perfection, when you believe there's a right life waiting to be selected like a product. But freedom was never meant to guarantee happiness. It was meant to give you authorship. Not to write the perfect story, but to own the messy, imperfect one you're writing now. So ask yourself, what are you waiting for? More clarity? More signs? More guarantees? Or are you just afraid that choosing means losing all the other lives you could have lived? That fear is real. Every choice is a kind of death, a funeral for all the other versions of you. But that's the cost of becoming real, of turning from infinite potential into something concrete, flawed, and alive. To be free is to risk regret. To be free is to feel the ache of all you didn't become. But it is also the only way to become anything at all. So don't be afraid of the closed doors. Don't be afraid of choosing wrong. Be afraid of never choosing, of floating between lives until you reach the end and realize you never lived any of them. Freedom doesn't mean everything is possible. It means something is, but only if you choose it. We often picture time as a river, constantly flowing, always moving forward, never stopping for anyone. The past recedes, the future approaches, and we ride the current with no oars, no anchor, no return. But what if time, in its blind rush toward progress, began to long for what it left behind? What if time itself could feel regret? This is the paradox of the time that regretted moving forward. A universe in motion, haunted by its own momentum, unable to stop, but wishing it could. Time is the great divider. It separates what was from what is, and what is from what could be. We use it to measure everything: growth, decay, memory, and meaning. But while we mark it on clocks and calendars, we rarely ask what time itself might feel, if it were conscious. What if it once stood still, or curled in on itself, and only started moving because it was trying to escape something, or chasing something it lost? Imagine a timeline that looks back and realizes that everything it created also destroyed something. With every birth came a death. With every sunrise, a fading memory. With every innovation, a forgotten simplicity. Progress may be inevitable, but it always costs something. And what if time, somewhere deep within its fabric, feels that loss? Maybe that's why nostalgia hurts so much. Nostalgia isn't just memory, it's mourning, it's time echoing backward. It's the ghost of a former present begging to be remembered. When we long for the past, we don't just miss people or places. We miss versions of ourselves that no longer exist. We miss the now that once was. But time can't return. It has no reverse. And that's where its regret begins. Regret implies awareness. It suggests that time, in some hidden corner of its being, can see the consequences of its forward motion. That it recognizes how its relentless unfolding erases what was tender, sacred, beautiful. And yet, it must keep going, like a train with no brakes, watching the tracks behind vanish into nothing. You've felt this, haven't you? That sensation of a perfect moment slipping through your fingers, even as you're living it. A day with someone you love. A laugh that feels eternal. A silence that heals. You try to hold on to it, but even as you do, it's fading, turning into memory, turning into ache. Why can't we stay in those moments? Because time won't allow it. Time moves forward, dragging you with it, no matter how much your soul reaches, backward. And maybe, just maybe, time knows what it's doing to you. Here's the paradox. Time creates meaning by moving, but movement ensures loss. A still life is static, lifeless, but a moving life is a disappearing one. If time didn't move, nothing would matter. But because it moves, everything eventually hurts. Some philosophers have asked, why does time move at all? Why not stand still or loop endlessly? Is the forward flow a law or a habit? In quantum physics, some equations work the same whether time flows forward or backward. Time's arrow, its direction, isn't baked into the math. It's baked into experience. Entropy, the increase of disorder, seems to give time its flow. But entropy doesn't care about meaning. It just spreads. And as it spreads, memories fade, bodies age, systems fall apart. So time may not be moving toward anything. It may simply be unraveling. Not progressing, but dissolving. And yet, we still build stories. We still speak of destiny, growth, timelines. We imagine time as a guide, when it may be more like a tide, washing over us, reshaping us, forgetting us. What if time looked back one day and wished it had waited? What if it missed the moments we miss? What if it regretted giving us future at the cost of presence? But even regret requires time. To regret is to look back. So for time to regret, it must be more than linear. It must remember. Maybe it does. Maybe every golden memory, every perfect instant you revisit again and again. That's not just your mind holding on. Maybe it's time leaking backward, trying to re-experience the beauty it helped create but could never keep. And maybe your longing isn't just human nostalgia. Maybe it's the echo of time's own sorrow, moving through you. A shared mourning between you and the fabric of the universe itself. So what do we do knowing this? We slow down. We stay longer in the moment. We let the seconds stretch. We stop asking, what's next? And start asking, what is here? Because time will move on, whether you're ready or not. But you don't have to. You can choose to pause, even if the world doesn't. You can become the still point in the turning world. You can hold a hand, take a breath, speak a truth, before it becomes a memory, before it becomes a ghost. Because time, as much as it moves forward, may still be listening. And maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for you to remember what it had to forget. Some thoughts arrive like lightning, sudden, brilliant, electric. They strike you in silence, during a walk, in a dream, or in the brief pause between distractions. They feel undeniable, like the truth has finally pierced through the noise. And then, just as suddenly, they vanish. You try to recapture them, retrace the mental steps, but it's gone. You remember having the thought, but not the thought itself. This is the paradox of the thought that couldn't be thought again. A realization so precise, so raw, that the very act of returning to it erases it. Why does this happen? We tend to think of thoughts as tools, objects we can summon, store, and retrieve at will. But not all thoughts obey that logic. Some are experiences, not items. They aren't meant to be remembered, they're meant to be felt, fully, just once. These thoughts live in a strange place between language and awareness, between instinct and insight. You can't quite explain them. If you try to describe them aloud, they collapse. You hear yourself speak and realize, that's not it, that's not what I meant. And the more you talk, the further away it gets. These are not shallow thoughts. They're glimpses of something deeper, often about existence, identity, death, God, time, or the self. They come from below the surface, not from your intellect, but from some subterranean part of your being that rarely speaks. And when it does, it whispers, then disappears. Have you ever stood in front of a mirror and just for a second truly saw yourself, not as a person, not as a name, but as something else, something looking out from behind the eyes, questioning reality itself? That moment, that thought, you couldn't keep it. You blinked and it was gone. You weren't supposed to hold it. You were supposed to witness it. And that's what makes this paradox so haunting. It's not that the thought was lost, it was never meant to stay, like a snowflake that melts the second you touch it, or a shadow that vanishes the moment you shine a light. Why? Because some thoughts exist only under specific conditions. A perfect alignment of emotion, environment, openness, and timing. Alter any one of those variables, and the thought dissolves. You try to re-enter that state, but it's like chasing a dream after waking up. You remember the feeling, but not the path, and the more profound the thought, the more elusive it becomes, because your rational mind wants to grasp it, name it, contain it. But that very effort turns it into something else. The thought wasn't yours in the way a possession is yours. It was more like a transmission, briefly tuned in, then lost too, static. There's a theory in mysticism and philosophy that certain ideas, real, transformative ideas, cannot be repeated. They are too large for language, too subtle for memory. They arrive in silence and leave without explanation. And if you try to recreate them, what you end up with is a performance, a copy of a copy. Even in science, we see echoes of this. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle tells us that observing a particle changes it. You can't know both its position and momentum at the same time. Similarly, when you try to observe the purest form of a thought, especially one tied to your core, awareness, you distort it just by looking at it. And yet, we keep trying. We meditate, journal, discuss, search, hoping to re-enter that lost mental temple. But here's the truth. You don't need to recapture the thought. You need to honor that it came at all. That moment of insight, however brief, was real. It was a ripple from the depths of your consciousness. A signal that something beyond language exists within you. The goal is not to own it, but to open yourself so that it might return in a new form, at a new time, wearing a new face. Because here's the beautiful irony. The thought that can't be thought again never really left. It changed you. It moved something inside you. It shifted your axis, even if you can't explain how. That's why you remember it, not as content, but as transformation. So maybe we need a new kind of thinking, one that doesn't cling, one that allows mystery to stay mysterious, one that sees forgetting not as failure, but as part of the design. You are not a machine meant to store every insight. You are a vessel, fluid, momentary, in motion. Some thoughts pass through you like light through a prism. They aren't meant to stay. They're meant to refract something within you, and then they're meant to go. The thought that couldn't be thought again was not a mistake. It was a gift. It served its purpose in the instant it arrived. And in that instant, you were more awake than you realized. Memory is the thread that stitches together your identity. You believe you are who you are because of what you remember. Your past experiences, triumphs, failures, traumas, joys. But what if some of those memories are false? What if, without realizing it, you've built a self around stories that never happened? This is the paradox of the memory that remembered what never happened, a mind haunted not by what was, but by what wasn't. We like to imagine memory as a recording device, flawed, perhaps, but grounded in truth. You live an event, store it away, and recall it later. Simple. But neuroscience says otherwise. Memory isn't a tape, it's a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, your brain rewrites it slightly, smoothing over gaps, blending details, filling in missing parts with assumptions. In other words, you're not remembering the event, you're remembering the last time you remembered it. Think about that. Your most cherished memories, the ones you return to for comfort or meaning, may be partly imagined. Or worse, they may be entirely fictional, patched together from dreams, stories, photographs, or even other people's experiences. It's not just personal either. Entire societies operate on collective memories, histories passed down through generations. But memory is fragile, especially when shared. Misinformation, myth, emotion, and repetition twist the truth. We remember heroes and villains in ways that serve our stories. We shape the past to make sense of the present. But what happens when your own mind becomes the unreliable narrator? Have you ever sworn something happened, only to be told that never occurred? Maybe you remember a conversation someone else insists didn't exist. Maybe you're certain you saw someone at a place they claim they've never been. Or maybe you have vivid memories of childhood moments, only to realize later they were stories you overheard and absorbed. This phenomenon is so common it has a name: false memory. It's not delusion. It's not a lie. It's your brain doing what it does best, filling in gaps to protect your sense of self. Memory isn't about accuracy. It's about narrative cohesion. Your brain would rather give you a believable lie than admit it doesn't. No. This is where the paradox deepens. The memory that remembered what never happened feels more real than memories you know are true. Why? Because memory isn't stored by factual weight. It's stored by emotional intensity. The more impact a moment seems to have had on your sense of identity, the more likely it is to solidify, even if that moment is entirely fabricated. Fight that never occurred, a betrayal that never happened, a love that was never real. These can shape you, limit you, drive your choices, because your brain doesn't always care if it's true. It cares if it matters. So you build your identity on a foundation you can't verify. And here's the terrifying beauty of it. That identity still functions. You wake up, go to work, love people, chase dreams, all while carrying stories that may have never taken place. You live as a character written by a novelist you can't name. But does it matter? If a memory that never happened gave you strength, helped you endure a difficult time, does its falsehood diminish its value? If a memory made you cautious or bold or reflective, even if it's an illusion, does that make your growth any less real? This is where the paradox softens, because maybe memory isn't about what happened. Maybe it's about what we needed to believe happened. Maybe memory is a psychological tool, not a historical archive. A mirror designed not to reflect, but to reshape. And maybe sometimes we remember what didn't happen because it should have happened, because we longed for it so deeply that our minds gave it to us as a gift. Or maybe we feared it so much that our minds gave it to us as a warning. Your memory may not be accurate, but it is honest about your fears, your hopes, your needs. So what should you do with this knowledge? First, loosen your grip. Stop treating memory as fact. Start seeing it as story. Interrogate it. Soften around its edges. Ask, is this how it happened or how I needed it to happen? Second, extend compassion to yourself and others. If someone misremembers something, it doesn't mean they're lying. They may be living in a version of the past that feels more real than reality. And third, embrace the mystery. If some of your memories aren't real, then who are you? Not a fixed identity, but a fluid story. A dream your brain keeps telling, rewriting, reshaping, remembering differently each time. You are not the sum of your memories. You are the awareness, watching those memories flicker in and out. You are the author and the amnesiac, the dreamer and the dreamed, and somewhere in that paradox, between truth and fabrication, you are becoming something real. We spend our lives trying to affirm that we are real. We touch things. We speak our names. We chase meaning and permanence. But what if existence, at its core, rejects that very desire? What if reality is a masquerade so complete that it forgets it's a performance? This is the paradox of the existence that refused to be real. A world that appears solid, yet slips through your fingers the moment you try to hold it. Ask yourself, what does it mean to be real? Is it physical presence? You can touch your body, feel the ground, see the sky. But dreams offer sensations too. Hallucinations can be tactile. Even in virtual simulations, we flinch, we react. Reality feels like it's happening, but feeling real is not the same as being real. The problem is that reality, as we know it, is built on perceptions, and perceptions are fragile, selective, and entirely dependent on your sensory apparatus. Your eyes detect a narrow band of light. Your ears hear a sliver of frequency. Your brain discards most of what's around you to protect you from sensory overload. What you call the real world is just a heavily edited highlight reel. Now consider this. If reality requires your mind to construct it, then what is it without that mind? Take away your senses, your memories, your language, your thoughts, and what remains? Does the world still exist? Or is it like a song that disappears when the speaker goes silent? Philosophers have struggled with this question for centuries. Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am," but that doesn't answer what he is, or whether the world around him shares in that certainty. Buddhist philosophy counters that the self is an illusion, that clinging to I am is the very root of suffering. Quantum physics complicates it further, suggesting particles exist in superposition until observed, as if the universe itself needs witnesses to make it real. So what is existence without observation? What is reality when no one is watching? It could be nothing, or it could be everything, unfiltered, formless, undefined. But here's where the paradox sharpens. Even if reality is real, independent, objective, eternal, it still refuses to prove itself. No matter how much we measure, explain, or dissect it, there is always a deeper level, a new layer, another mystery. the more we try to grasp it, the more it slips. Reality doesn't want to be caught. It doesn't want to sit still. It recoils from definition. This isn't just science or philosophy, it's personal. Have you ever stood in a moment that felt too surreal to be real? A tragedy so sudden, a joy so perfect, that you paused and thought, is this actually happening? It's not confusion, it's recognition. That reality sometimes breaks its own rules. It bends, glitches, contradicts. And in those moments, you see the mask slip. Like when you stare at your reflection too long and feel like it's watching you. Or when time seems to stretch, break, or disappear. Or when someone speaks a truth you've never told aloud. And you wonder, who's writing this? Maybe existence isn't a fact. Maybe it's a story. A narrative told by something that's forgotten its the author. A dream so deep, it dreams of not dreaming. And maybe that's you. You think of yourself as real. Of course you do. You feel pain. You fall in love. You age. But those are experiences. They don't prove that there's a you having them. They just happen. Just like thunder happens. Just like wind. A cluster of sensations without a center. The existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote that existence is absurd, that it simply is without explanation, reason, or necessity. You find yourself thrown into a world you didn't choose, with a body you didn't build, on a planet you can't control, spinning toward death. And yet you must make meaning out of that. You must pretend it makes sense. But what if existence refuses your meaning? What if the world was never supposed to make sense? What if it wants to remain ambiguous? That would explain a lot. The contradictions of consciousness, the endless recursion of thought, the inability to find a final answer to anything. It would mean existence is not the problem. Your demand for reality is. The more you insist that life must be real, stable, linear, the more suffering you invite. But if you allow existence to be surreal, unstable, wild, then you meet it on its own terms. Then you stop asking the river to stand still. You just learn to swim. So what does this paradox leave you with? Not certainty, not clarity, but freedom. If existence refuses to be real, you're no longer bound by the rules you thought were sacred. You can breathe in the chaos. You can step outside the story. You can let go of being someone, somewhere, trying to find something, and just be this. This breath. This flicker. This ungraspable now. The universe may never declare itself real, but your awareness of that mystery, that just might be the realest thing of all. We usually think of fear as the enemy, an alarm bell, a threat response, a signal that something is wrong. We fight it, flee from it, or try to suppress it. But what if, beneath all that, fear actually makes us feel safe? What if the discomfort of fear is more comforting than the chaos of the unknown? This is the paradox of the fear that felt safe. A mind that found security not in peace, but in perpetual anxiety. It sounds absurd at first. Why would anyone want to feel fear? Why would we cling to the very thing we say we're trying to escape? But look closer. Fear offers something seductive. Predictability. When you're afraid, you know the rules, you know the boundaries. You don't have to risk surprise or vulnerability. Fear builds a familiar cage, and sometimes the cage feels safer than the open world outside. This is why people stay in toxic relationships, dead-end jobs, or self-destructive habits. It's not because they enjoy suffering. It's because the fear they know feels more bearable than the uncertainty they don't. It's easier to manage a familiar pain than to leap into a freedom that has no guarantees. Fear tells a story. If you just worry hard enough, you'll be prepared. It gives you something to do, something to focus on. It creates the illusion of control. Your mind whispers, if I anticipate every disaster, maybe none of them will happen. But the irony is, fear doesn't prevent chaos. It just rehearses it endlessly. And here's the twist. Fear becomes a ritual, a protective spell. You begin to feel uneasy when you're not afraid. As if peace is suspicious. As if stillness is the eye of the storm. So you scan for threats. You look for the next problem. You stay in motion because stopping feels like weakness, or worse, exposure. Fear becomes your home. You don't like it there, but it's decorated in your patterns. It smells familiar. It wraps around you like a weighted blanket soaked in ice water. And the strangest thing is, you miss it when it's gone. Think of someone who spent years battling anxiety. When they finally find peace, they don't feel joy. They feel disoriented. Restlessness creeps in. The quiet feels eerie. Shouldn't something be wrong right now? They ask. They've mistaken calm for danger because their nervous system is calibrated to crisis. And so, fear becomes safety. Not because it protects you from harm, but because it protects you from the unknown, from the unbearable openness of possibility, from the vulnerability of joy. Because joy, unlike fear, has something to lose. Joy makes you soft. Fear keeps you armored. So which would you rather feel? The sharp ache of fear or the fragile wonder of peace? This paradox gets even stranger when you realize how society rewards fear. Entire industries thrive on it. News media, insurance, security systems, even wellness products. You're taught to see fear as responsible, as awareness, as intelligence. A cautious person is smart. A relaxed person is naive. So we internalize the lesson. Safety lies in constant vigilance, but vigilance becomes hypervigilance. Caution becomes paralysis. You build walls around yourself, thinking they'll protect you, but eventually they block everything out. Light, love, hope, and yet, part of you still thinks, better alone and armored than open and broken. The paradox becomes a cycle. Fear makes you feel protected. Protection makes you feel alone. Loneliness makes you feel exposed. Exposure brings more fear, and round it goes. So what breaks the cycle? Not more bravery, not more control, but curiosity. What happens if you ask your fear, what are you trying to protect me from? Maybe it will answer, loss, abandonment, failure. Or maybe it will just say, I don't know, but I need to stay just in case. And maybe that's when you realize, fear isn't your enemy, it's your child. It's scared, not dangerous. It wants to help. It just doesn't know how. When you see fear as a protector, misguided, overzealous, exhausted, you stop fighting it. You stop letting it drive too. You place it in the passenger seat. You say, thank you for trying to keep me safe, but I'm choosing something else now. You choose uncertainty, not because it's comfortable, but because it's true. Because growth lives there, love lives there, joy too. And yes, pain does as well. But pain is not the opposite of safety. Stagnation is. So if you're living in a loop of fear, ask yourself, is this keeping me safe? Or is it just keeping me still? Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't charging into danger. It's stepping out of the cell you built from your own defenses, because the fear that felt safe was never safe at all. It was just familiar, and real safety, it comes when you stop surviving long enough to start living. We chase knowledge like a promise. Learn more, and you'll understand. Understand more, and you'll be free. But what if the opposite happens? What if the more you learn, the less you actually know? What if the pursuit of knowledge eventually dissolves the very certainty it was meant to provide? This is the paradox of the knowledge that made you unknow. A mind that gathered truths until those truths began to cancel each other out. It begins innocently. You learn basic facts. Fire burns, gravity pulls, the earth orbits the sun. These are solid, comforting. They help you make sense of the world. But then you look deeper, and the solidity begins to dissolve. Atoms, the building blocks of matter, are mostly empty space. Solid objects are just illusions created by repelling forces. Time, once thought to be fixed, stretches and contracts depending on speed and gravity. Even light behaves like both a particle and a wave, depending on how you look at it. The deeper you dig, the stranger it gets. In philosophy, the same unraveling occurs. You study morality, only to find every ethic has a counter-ethic. You study consciousness, only to realize no one knows what it really is. You study the self, only to find it's a convenient fiction made of habits, stories, and memories stitched together by time. Knowledge, once a light, becomes a mirror, and the more you stare into it, the more you see your reflection fade. This isn't just academic, it's emotional. You may have felt it yourself. The shock of learning a historical figure you admired wasn't as noble as you thought. The moment you discovered a cherished childhood belief was false. The ache of growing up and realizing your parents didn't have all the answers. Knowledge deconstructs the world you once trusted. And yet, we keep going. Because knowledge is addictive. It promises power. It makes us feel like we're rising above ignorance. But the cruel twist is this. The more accurately you see the world, the more you see how little you can hold on to. Even your own thoughts are suspect. Neuroscience shows that decisions often occur before we're conscious of making them. That free will might be an illusion, that your preferences, your desires, even your sense of I, could be emergent phenomena, not foundations. So what does it mean to know anything? We assume knowledge leads to clarity, but sometimes it leads to fragmentation. Your sense of self, of morality, of meaning begins to erode. Not because the world is wrong, but because your old frameworks can't contain the complexity. You start to unknow, and this can be terrifying. If knowledge doesn't bring certainty, then what's the point? If every answer opens 10 more questions, if every truth reveals its own opposite, how do you move forward? But here's where the paradox turns. Unknowing is not the same as ignorance. Ignorance is the absence of knowledge. Unknowing is the transcendence of it. It's what happens when you realize knowledge is not about collecting facts, but learning how to live with doubt, how to hold multiple perspectives without collapsing into nihilism, how to remain grounded while floating in uncertainty. There's a quiet wisdom in that. The mystics knew it. Socrates said, "I know that I know nothing." The Zen masters speak in riddles designed not to inform, but to disarm the intellect. They teach that true insight arises only when the mind surrenders its need to know, because the mind that always needs an answer cannot receive wisdom. It only receives confirmation. So what if you allowed yourself to unknow? To admit that reality is not a puzzle to be solved, but an experience to be inhabited. What if you let go of the idea that knowledge is about mastery and saw it instead as a dance? A dialogue with mystery, not a conquest of it. This shift isn't passive, it's powerful. It frees you from rigid certainty. It allows you to ask better questions. It opens space for wonder, for compassion, for play. You become less obsessed with being right and more curious about being real. And that curiosity can hold the whole world. Its contradictions, its beauty, its chaos. You begin to see that the unknowing mind is not lost. It's open. So don't fear the unraveling. When knowledge undoes what you thought was true, don't see it as failure. See it as evolution. You're shedding skins, shedding certainty, shedding the illusion that you could ever stand outside the world and fully explain it. You are not meant to know everything. You are meant to meet everything with humility, with courage, with awe. So if your knowledge is making you question everything, good. That means it's working. That means you're waking up. And in that raw space where certainty used to live, you'll find something far more useful. Not a map, not an answer, but the ability to walk into the unknown and stay. We're taught to value truth, to speak it, defend it, pursue it. Words are how we define reality, express love, establish identity, and fight injustice. But sometimes, the deepest truths are not spoken at all. Sometimes they arrive through what is not said. This is the paradox of the silence that spoke louder than truth. A moment where stillness reveals more than speech ever could. Think back to a time when someone said nothing, and yet you understood everything. The look in their eyes, the space between words, the message between breaths. It wasn't in a sentence, it was in presence, in restraint, in absence, and it hit harder than any confession or explanation ever could. We think silence is empty, but it isn't. It's full, dense with possibility, heavy with meaning. Words narrow things down. Silence keeps them open. It holds contradictions. It allows multiple truths to coexist without collapsing them into a single narrative. In that way, silence isn't passive. It's powerful, and sometimes it's the only honest response, because words can lie. They can distort, distract, or dilute. We say what's expected. We shape stories to fit the listener, to protect ourselves, to control how we're perceived. But silence, it has no agenda. It doesn't try to convince or impress. It just is, and that's why it can be terrifying. In conversation, silence is uncomfortable. We rush to fill it. We assume it means awkwardness, disapproval, emptiness. But what if silence is just the place where something true is waiting to surface? Something too raw, too large, too sacred to be forced into syllables. There's a reason grief often renders us speechless, or why lovers sometimes fall quiet, not from distance, but from depth. Words can't reach certain places, and when they try, they can feel cheap, inadequate, like trying to explain the ocean with a teaspoon. Even in arguments, silence can carry more weight than shouting. The refusal to speak is not always surrender. Sometimes it's a boundary, a declaration that says, "No words will change this," or "You already know," or "You're not listening." Silence then becomes its own language, one that speaks in pauses, presence, and absence. It doesn't need translation because it bypasses intellect and moves straight into the body, the gut, the soul. And yet, in our hyperverbal world, we've forgotten how to listen to silence. We fill every gap with notifications, music, chatter, opinions. Stillness is seen as a void to be conquered, But silence is not lack, it's space. And space is where meaning can emerge. In music, the pause between notes gives rhythm. In writing, the white space gives shape to the words. In life, it is silence that allows reflection, depth, awareness. And sometimes, truth doesn't arrive in the sentence, but in the breath before it. This paradox shows up in spiritual traditions too. Mystics across cultures describe the deepest insights not as revelations spoken, but as realizations that arrive in silence. Meditation, prayer, contemplation. These practices aren't about adding more information, but about removing the noise so something deeper can be heard. And what is that something? Not always an answer. Often, it's a knowing, a feeling, a presence, not the kind of truth you can argue or defend, but one you inhabit. Here's where the paradox intensifies. The more profound a truth is, the harder it is to express. Some truths don't survive articulation. They get twisted the moment we try to explain them, like a dream that fades as you describe it, or a feeling that weakens when dissected. So what do we do with that? We learn to respect silence, to trust that not every truth needs to be spoken to be real, that sometimes the absence of words is the message. This applies not just to others, but to ourselves. Think of the internal dialogue you carry, the relentless narrator, the mental chatter. What would happen if, just for a moment, you turned the volume down, not to escape, but to listen? Beneath the noise, something waits, not a sentence, not an answer, just a stillness that holds you without judgment or definition. In that silence, there's no pressure to perform, no need to explain who you are. You are, and that's enough. And perhaps the ultimate paradox is this: the truth you've been searching for, the one buried beneath books, teachings, opinions, and language, was never hidden. It was simply silent, not because it had nothing to say, but because it needed you to stop speaking long enough to feel it. So the next time you're lost for words, don't force them. Let the silence speak. Let it say what language cannot. Let it carry the weight your voice cannot hold. Let it become the truth that echoes long after sound has gone. Because some truths don't need to be heard to be known. They only need to be felt. In the silence that says it all, you wake up, you breathe, you move through the world, you think, I exist. But beneath that quiet certainty, something strange lurks. A whisper, a question, a doubt. What if I don't? What if the self I carry like a spine through my life is just a mirage? This is the paradox of the being that doubted it ever was. A presence haunted by the possibility of its own absence. It begins innocently enough. You ask, who am I? A question as old as consciousness. You list your name, your roles, your memories. But each answer peels back a layer, and none of them quite stick. Your name was given to you. Your roles were shaped by others. Your memories shift and blur. What then is left? You try to find the center, the you behind the mask, but the more you look, the more it moves. It's like chasing a shadow in fog, always just out of reach, never fully formed. And eventually, the terrifying possibility arises. Maybe there's no one there. This is more than philosophy, it's experiential. Sit long enough in stillness, no phone, no noise, no role to perform. And something happens. The stories fall away, the past grows quiet, the future loses urgency, and all that remains is awareness, bare and unshaped. It sees, it notices, but it doesn't know who it is. And in that space, the self begins to feel imagined, not false, not meaningless, but constructed, as if you were a character played by a deeper, silent force, a mask worn by awareness to participate in time. You can feel this fracture most intensely in moments of disorientation. Ever stood in front of a mirror and felt like the reflection wasn't quite you? Or caught your name being said and thought, that sounds like someone else? Or found an old photo and remembered the day, but not the person in the photo? These moments are glimpses, slips in the veil, proof that the self is not a fixed object, but a feeling, one that can fade, glitch, or disappear altogether. The philosopher David Hume famously said he could never find a self, only a bundle of perceptions, thoughts, sensations, emotions, memories, all flashing in and out like fireflies. No central observer, just flickers of experience pretending to be continuity. And yet, you feel like someone. So what is that feeling? Is it memory? Then who remembers? The remembering? Is it attention? Then why does it vanish in deep sleep or unconsciousness? Is it voice? Then why can't it speak when you're truly present? Here's where the paradox tightens. To be conscious of yourself is to create distance from yourself. The moment you observe I am, you step outside the moment and begin narrating it. You become the watcher, not the being. And in doing so, you fracture. One part watches, one part acts. And neither is fully you, so you keep trying to stitch yourself back together with stories. I'm this kind of person. I had this childhood. I believe in these things, but deep down, part of you wonders, am I making this up? You aren't alone in that doubt. Many spiritual traditions teach that the self is an illusion, not in a dismissive way, but as an invitation. If you let go of the illusion of self, they say, you don't become less real, you become more free. You stop trying to defend something that doesn't need protection. You stop trying to prove something that doesn't need validation. But this, freedom comes at a price, the death of certainty. It means walking through life not as someone with answers, but as a question. Not as a fixed identity, but as a shifting presence. Not as a being sure it exists, but as a mystery inhabiting form. And maybe that's the most honest way to live. Because let's be clear, you do exist. At least, something does. There is experience. There is awareness. But you, as a separate, permanent entity, that might be the illusion. A useful one, perhaps. A poetic one. But still, an invention. And maybe the self's greatest wisdom is its willingness to doubt itself. Because in that doubt there's humility. In that doubt, there's space. And in that space, something more honest can emerge. Not a new identity, but a new kind of presence. A presence that doesn't need to be named. A presence that doesn't need to be proven. Just awareness. Being. So, the being that doubted it ever was. Maybe it was never meant to find an answer. Maybe it was meant to live the question. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the truest self begins. A mirror promises honesty. It reflects what's there. Your body, your face, your expressions. It doesn't argue or interpret. It shows what is. But what if the mirror lies? What if the reflection is not truth, but illusion, shaped not by what's real, but by what you expect to see? This is the paradox of the mirror that reflected a lie, a surface that seems objective, yet secretly tells you only what you already believe. Stand in front of a mirror, really look. You see your features, your posture, your age, but you're not just seeing. you're interpreting. That wrinkle becomes evidence of decline. That smirk becomes arrogance. That stillness becomes shame. You don't just see yourself, you judge yourself. And that judgment shapes the reflection more than the glass ever could. This happens so quickly, so automatically, that we mistake it for objectivity, but it's anything but. What we see in the mirror is filtered through layers of memory, trauma, insecurity, pride, fear. Two people can look at the same face and see two completely different truths. The mirror may be neutral, but our eyes are not. Even more unsettling is the fact that you never actually see yourself directly. Not once in your life. Only reflections, photos, videos, feedback from others. You're a phantom in your own world, constructing your image from external fragments and internal stories. Yourself is always slightly removed, always partly fiction. And yet, you trust the mirror. You go to it for confirmation. Am I attractive? Am I aging? Am I okay? And the mirror answers, but its answer is shaped by what you're looking for. If you approach with insecurity, it will show you flaws. If you approach with ego, it will show you power. The mirror doesn't lie outright. It simply reflects your beliefs back at you. In that way, it becomes a dangerous tool. A place where perception masquerades as truth. A place where the stories you tell yourself find visual proof. And this doesn't stop at physical appearance. There are mirrors in the social world too. People, reactions, social media likes, applause, silence. These too reflect something back to you. And like glass, they seem honest. You say, they didn't respond. Maybe I'm not interesting. Or, they praised me. Maybe I'm finally enough. But here too, the mirror lies. Because people's reflections are shaped by their lenses, their moods, their projections. What they reflect is often not you, but themselves. So where then is the real mirror? Is it in your memories? But those shift and rewrite themselves with time. Is it in your mind? But the mind is a hall of mirrors, one thought bouncing off another, each warped by emotion, and so you search endlessly for something accurate, a place to see yourself clearly, a mirror that doesn't lie. But maybe that mirror doesn't exist. Maybe it can't. Because the very act of looking for truth about yourself implies distance. And in that distance, distortion begins. To see yourself is to split yourself, to become both observer and observed. And in that split, the image becomes fiction. So what do you do with this? Some people shatter the mirror entirely. They reject appearances, silence the critics, renounce the ego. But even that can become another reflection, another performance. Deeper path is to see the lie and keep looking anyway, not to find certainty, but to soften around illusion, to know that your reflection is not final, that what you see today will not be what you see tomorrow, that the mirror's power lies not in truth, but in its invitation. Will you believe what you see or question what you believe? There's freedom in that question. It means you don't have to be defined by your reflection, be it in glass, in people, or in thought. You can meet yourself with curiosity instead of critique. You can say, this is what I see, but is it what I am? You can stop demanding that mirrors be perfect and start asking why you keep needing them. Because the truest parts of you, the kindness, the courage, the consciousness itself, can't be reflected. They're not visual, they're experiential. They live not in image, but in presence. The mirror that reflected a lie never meant to deceive you. It simply couldn't show you what you weren't ready to see. And maybe now, you are. So the next time you stand before a mirror, literal or metaphorical, pause. Feel the tension between the surface and what lies beneath. Feel the urge to judge, and then release it. Let the reflection be a suggestion, not a verdict. Let the lie pass through you without becoming your truth. Because sometimes, the clearest way to see yourself is to stop looking and just be. We rely on logic to keep the world together. It gives structure to chaos, boundaries to thought, steps to problems, and clarity to confusion. It tells us that if A is true, and A leads to B, then B must also be true. Logic is the language of order, of reason, of progress. But what happens when logic turns on itself, when it loops, contradicts, and collapses under the weight of its own consistency? This is the paradox of the logic that broke itself apart. A system so precise that it unravels the moment it tries to define itself. Let's start with a famous example, the liar's paradox. Imagine someone says, "This statement is false." If the statement is true, then what it says must hold, so it must be false. But if it's false, then it's not true that it's false, which would make it true. It loops forever. It traps logic in a circuit it can't escape. You can't say whether the statement is true or false without invalidating the rules you're using to decide. This isn't just a word game. It exposes something deep and unsettling. Logic is not immune to contradiction. The 20th century mathematician Kurt Gödel proved this in his incompleteness theorems, among the most groundbreaking and haunting discoveries in mathematics. He showed that in any consistent logical system complex enough to include arithmetic, there will always be truths that cannot be proven within the system itself. In simpler terms, no logical system can prove all its own truths without collapsing. This shattered the dream that logic alone could fully explain the universe. No matter how tightly we construct our arguments, there will always be statements that are true but unprovable, truths beyond logic's grasp. So we begin to ask, if logic can't explain everything, what are we left with? Uncertainty, doubt, silence. The very tools we use to find truth contain within them the seeds of untruth. And here the paradox blooms. The more rigorously we apply logic, the more we see its limits. It's like building a ladder to the sky, only to realize that the higher you climb, the more fragile the structure becomes, and eventually it begins to bend under its own weight. This plays out not just in mathematics or philosophy, but in daily life. You try to reason your way through a moral dilemma. On one hand, X is the right thing to do, but on the other hand, it causes harm. You follow logic and end up with two valid yet opposing answers. You analyze your own emotions. You trace their origins, dissect your memories, identify patterns, and yet, the feeling doesn't go away. If anything, it becomes more complex. The logic of your mind doesn't soothe the ache of your heart, and in conversation, logic can betray you. You might win the argument, but lose the relationship. You might prove you're right, but feel terribly wrong. Because logic doesn't understand nuance, tone, humanity. It knows how to structure thoughts, but not how to hold pain. So what do? We could abandon logic altogether, but that leaves us adrift in chaos. We could cling to it desperately, but that leads to coldness, rigidity, disconnection. The answer lies in understanding what logic is and what it isn't. Logic is a tool, not a truth. A map, not the territory. It can guide you through many puzzles, but not all. It can build systems, test theories, solve equations, but it cannot hold paradox. It cannot explain love. It cannot calculate beauty. It cannot contain consciousness. And when logic meets those frontiers, those vast soft spaces beyond reason, it begins to crack. Not because it failed, but because it reached its edge. In that moment, you must make a choice. Tighten your grip, or let go. To let go is not to become irrational. It's to become transrational, to know when to step beyond structure, to trust feeling, intuition, silence, to accept that not all meaning can be explained, that some things must be lived, not solved. This is not a rejection of logic. It's a maturation of it, a reverence for its brilliance, and an awareness of its blindness, because the logic that broke itself apart did not destroy itself in failure. It simply bowed to something larger. And in doing so, it whispered a final, quiet truth. I can take you far, but not all the way. The rest of the path is yours to feel, yours to listen to, yours to walk without a formula. So honor logic, use it well, but when it breaks, don't panic. That's not the end of understanding. It's the beginning of something deeper. Hope is supposed to lift us. It's the light we cling to in darkness, the whisper that says, keep going. We're told that hope is strength, a lifeline, a force of survival. But what if hope, under certain conditions, becomes a trap? What if the thing meant to sustain us ends up hollowing us out? This is the paradox of the hope that led to despair, an emotional loop where the very act of believing in a better future becomes the reason you suffer in the present. To understand this, we have to start with what hope really is. Hope is the projection of a desired outcome into the future. It says, things aren't good now, but they will be. It requires dissatisfaction. Otherwise, you wouldn't need hope. And it requires faith that change is possible. But here's the problem. Hope delays life. It ties your peace, your happiness, your sense of meaning. Not to now, but to later. When you hope, you postpone. You say, I'll feel whole when I find love. I'll feel free when I succeed. I'll be okay when the pain ends. But what if later never comes? What if the hoped-for moment is always just out of reach? What if each new hope becomes another unmet expectation? That's when hope begins to rot. That's when hope turns cruel. You've probably felt this. Waiting for someone to change. Believing things will get better. Holding out for a sign, a shift, a miracle. But days become weeks. Weeks become years. And slowly, hope begins to ache. The very thing that once gave you strength now feels like a chain, pulling you toward a version of life that never arrives. Hope becomes emotional debt, and like all debt, it compounds. Each time the future disappoints, the cost grows heavier. Eventually, you start to resent the very hope you once cherished. You feel betrayed, not by the world, but by your own belief that it would improve. Here's where the despair creeps in. Despair is not the absence of hope. It's the collapse of it. It's the moment you realize your dreams were not just unmet. They were never real to begin with. That the idea of a better life was a fiction used to keep you compliant, patient, waiting. And in that collapse, a strange kind of clarity emerges. You see how much of your identity was built on what might happen, rather than what is. You see how deeply you resisted the present, because it didn't match the future you imagined. You see that hope wasn't a light at all. It was a distraction, a delay, a drug. And yet, can we live without it, Isn't hope what keeps people alive in the worst conditions? Isn't it what helps us recover from grief, illness, loss? Yes, hope is necessary, but only when it's rooted in reality. False hope is the danger. Hope that denies what is. Hope that depends on others changing. Hope that attaches itself to specific outcomes you cannot control. That kind of hope doesn't empower, it enslaves. It says, you are not enough now, but you will be, if, when, someday. So what's the alternative? Not despair. The alternative is a new kind of hope, one that lives not in the future, but in the present. Not in outcomes, but in openness. Not in fantasy, but in faith without specifics. It says, I don't know what will happen, but I choose to remain available to possibility. It says, I let go of needing the future to redeem the past. It says, I hope, not because I believe in something better, but because I believe in being here fully, even when things are hard. This kind of hope doesn't delay life, it deepens it. It doesn't distract from pain, it includes it. It lets you live with uncertainty without needing a promise. It gives you strength, not because things will improve, but because you can stay open even if they don't. And strangely, when you stop using hope as a shield against despair, despair loosens its grip, because despair thrives on resistance. When you accept the unknown, you're no longer imprisoned by unmet expectation. You're just here, breathing, feeling, living. Maybe the paradox was never about choosing between hope or despair. Maybe the deeper truth is this: hope, when clung to too tightly, becomes despair, but despair, when fully faced, becomes a doorway back to honest hope. Not the hopeful smile painted over a broken heart, but the quiet, steady hope of someone who knows pain and still shows up anyway. So if hope has hurt you, don't run from it. Don't bury it. Don't reject it. Let it collapse. Let it lead you to the raw soil of now. And from that soil, something gentler can grow. Not a fantasy, not a promise, just the courage to begin again. We love reasons. They give us a sense of order. We want to know why things happen, why we feel what we feel, why people act the way they do. Reason provides meaning. It reassures us that the world isn't random, that effects have causes, actions have motives, and life can be understood if we just think hard enough. But what happens when reason no longer leads to anything real? What if the explanations you rely on begin to unravel, and the justifications you cling to turn hollow? This is the paradox of the reason that lost its cause, a mind that builds meaning from logic, only to find that the foundation has quietly disappeared. Think of a belief you hold. Maybe it's about who you are, why you work the job you do, why you love someone, why you fear something. Ask yourself, what's the reason behind that belief? Then go deeper. Where did that reason come from? Keep going. What you'll often find is a trail of reasoning that loops, contradicts, or ends abruptly, revealing not solid ground, but thin air. Our reasons are often inherited. We adopt them from parents, culture, media, trauma. But we carry them like we forged them ourselves. We say things like, I have to do this, or I'm not the kind of person who, without ever tracing where those stories came from, or whether they were ever truly ours. And the more you interrogate reason, the more it starts to slip. You work hard because you want to be successful. You want to be successful to feel secure. You want to feel secure because You fear failure. You fear failure because you were taught it means you're unlovable. Eventually, you stop hitting answers and start hitting loops. Reason, meant to explain everything, begins to explain itself in circles. This isn't just personal, it's structural. Look at history. Empires justified war in the name of peace. Religions justified cruelty in the name of compassion. Economics justified inequality in the name of meritocracy. And individuals justified harm to others in the name of survival, justice, even love. All of it made sense to someone. But over time, the reasons rot. They outlive their causes, and yet they keep echoing. A rule becomes a ritual. A reaction becomes a tradition. A trauma becomes an identity. The reason that once had meaning becomes a phantom, and you live by it, even after forgetting why. This is how people end up stuck in patterns they can't explain. The perfectionist who doesn't know what they're trying to prove. The people pleaser who doesn't know who they're trying to please. The rebel who no longer remembers what they're resisting. They live by reasons that lost their cause. And here's where it gets darker. When reason fails, many people panic. Because if your reasons are invalid, what does that say about your life? Your choices? Your identity? We don't just rely on reason to explain the world. We use it to explain ourselves. And when that structure crumbles, the collapse feels personal. But maybe the collapse isn't failure. Maybe it's freedom. Because if the reason was false, then maybe the path you're on doesn't need to be followed anymore. Maybe the rules you thought were binding were only habits of thought. Maybe the why you've been chasing doesn't matter as much as you believed. There's a strange peace in letting go of needing a reason for everything. Not to live in chaos, but to live in contact. To act not from explanation, but from awareness. Not from justification, but from presence. Imagine walking into a forest. You don't ask, "Why is this tree here?" or "What's the reason for this bird's song?" You just witness. You experience. You allow. What if you treated your thoughts, your emotions, your relationships the same way? What if instead of always asking why, you started asking what now? Not because reason is useless, but because it has limits, and when those limits are reached, something deeper becomes possible. Being without needing a reason to be. Children do this naturally. They play. They sing. They ask strange questions. They don't need a cause to explore, to imagine, to laugh. Their actions arise from presence, not premise. We lose that as we grow older. We become addicted to explanation. We seek cause like a compass, but sometimes the compass spins. And instead of forcing it to stop, maybe we need to sit still and feel the earth beneath us. Because when reason loses its cause, you have two choices. Cling tighter, build more arguments, try to make sense of a system that's already collapsed, or surrender, let go, and step into the unknown, not with answers, but with openness. And perhaps in that openness, new reasons will arise, not borrowed, not forced, but honest. Reasons that don't loop. Reasons that don't need defending. Reasons that live in your body, not just your mind. The reason that lost its cause wasn't broken. It was revealing the deeper truth. You don't need to understand everything to be real. You don't need to justify your presence to deserve it. Sometimes, the most powerful reason is none at all. You've had dreams before. Vivid, strange, beautiful, or terrifying. You've woken from them with a sense of relief, or longing, or confusion. But what if the dream never ended? What if instead of waking up, the dream itself became aware that it was dreaming? This is the paradox of the dream that woke itself up. A reality so lucid that it begins to question its own fabric. A self-aware illusion that looks in the mirror and says, "What am I?" Let's begin with a familiar moment. You're in a dream and something feels off. A clock has no hands. A person changes faces. You suddenly float. Something clicks. You realize this isn't real. And in that instant, the dream changes. You've become lucid. The dream is still happening, but now you know it's a dream. Now take that further. What if waking life is just a more stable dream? A deeper simulation, one that follows consistent rules, behaves with logic, and insists it's real, until one day it doesn't. There's a moment when awareness turns inward. When you're sitting quietly and suddenly feel like the whole world is a set, your thoughts are scripted, your movements rehearsed. The people around you speak their lines, and you play your part, but you're no longer sure who's writing the play. That's the beginning of waking up within the dream. In many spiritual traditions, this moment is called awakening, but it's not about leaving the world. It's about seeing through it, realizing that everything you took to be solid is just a projection. That identity is a costume. That time is a storyline. That thought is not truth. That the you who thinks it's in control was never driving. The dream realizes it is dreaming. And here's the paradox. Instead of vanishing, the dream becomes clearer. Colors intensify. Emotions deepen. Presence sharpens. Nothing has changed, and yet everything has. You still go to work, speak to friends, eat food, but now with a kind of double vision. You're in the world, but not entirely of it. But why would a dream do this? Because something within it has always known. A seed of awareness embedded in illusion. A whisper saying, there is more than this. And when the dream listens, it stirs. The dream begins to question, who am I? And the answer doesn't come from outside. It rises like steam from the center of stillness. You begin to remember not events, but states of being. You recall not specific lifetimes or memories, but the feeling of having always been. Not a person, not a story, but a witness, a watcher. A field of consciousness that is dreaming form into being. This isn't metaphor, it's direct experience. You've likely brushed against it, in moments of awe, looking at stars, lost in music, on the edge of sleep. You've felt reality soften. You've sensed something vast beneath the moment. That feeling wasn't fantasy. It was the dream stirring, blinking, beginning to see itself. But awakening isn't always blissful. When a dream wakes up, the illusion starts to crumble. Things that once felt important lose their urgency. Goals seem empty. Drama feels absurd. You can't play the game the same way anymore. You try, but something inside resists. You see the wires now. You hear the echoes, and that clarity can feel like loss. Who am I, if not this identity? What matters if this is all a dream? How do I live knowing it's not real in the way I once believed? But here's the beautiful resolution to the paradox. The dream doesn't end. It continues with awareness. You don't disappear. You arrive, not into fantasy, but into presence, into the raw, unspeakable realness of now. Because when the dream wakes up, it doesn't dissolve, it transforms. Life becomes art. Each moment becomes deliberate. Suffering becomes a message. Joy becomes a question. You move not because you must, but because it is beautiful to move. You no longer seek meaning, you embody it. And perhaps that was the point all along, not to escape the dream, not to reject it, but to become lucid within it, to live not as a lost character, but as the dreamer remembering itself. So how do you know if you're dreaming? Ask yourself now, what if none of this is real? What if the roles, the plans, the thoughts, what if they're just scenery? Now take a breath. Notice the stillness behind the noise. Notice the awareness that has been watching this whole time. That hasn't changed. That hasn't moved. That isn't thinking, it's seeing. That is the part of you that never slept. The dreamer within the dream. And now, it's starting to wake up. Desire is usually seen as directional. You want something, money, love, peace, achievement, and you move toward it. It fuels motivation, ambition, action. It promises fulfillment on the other side of acquisition. But what if there's a kind of desire that isn't aimed at anything at all? A hunger with no meal, a longing with no name. This is the paradox of the desire that had no object, a yearning that burns not for something, but from something, a fire that doesn't consume. It creates the illusion that there's something missing. Have you ever felt it? That strange ache when everything seems fine on the surface, but something inside you stirs. You can't name it. You're not sad, you're not lonely, but you feel the pull, like your soul is reaching for something just outside the edges of your understanding. You look around for causes. Maybe it's love you need, or success, or rest, or change. You chase distractions. You scroll, you plan, you seek, but none of it scratches the itch, because the itch isn't about the world, it's about you. This desire doesn't want satisfaction, it wants existence. It is the pulse of awareness, searching for itself in form. It is the void, wanting to be filled by what it already contains. It is presence, forgetting its wholeness and mistaking itself for need. That's why fulfilling ordinary desires doesn't quiet this one. You get what you thought you wanted, and the satisfaction is temporary. The relief dissolves, and the ache returns. You move on to the next goal, the next person, the next version of yourself. And still, it remains. Because it was never about having. It was about being. This paradox can be seen in every aspect of human life. Consider art. Why do we create? Is it to express something specific? Or is it because there's an unspeakable pressure inside us and art gives it shape, even if we don't know what it's saying? Consider love. How often do we think we want another person, when in truth, we want the version of ourselves we feel when we are with them, a kind of completion we project onto their presence, a reflection of the belonging we forgot we already carry. Desire at this level is not about an object, it's about returning to a wholeness we believe we've lost. And so we chase. But we chase in circles. The poet Rumi once wrote, "What you seek is seeking you." But perhaps it's even more radical than that. What you seek is already you. The desire that had no object is a message. It's the mind's way of pointing toward the soul. It's the heart's way of reminding you that you are not empty, you're overflowing. That the ache is not a lack, but a calling. But this kind of understanding is not easy, because we are conditioned to treat every feeling as a problem to solve. Every desire as a sign that we must go out and get something. We rarely stop to ask, what if there's nothing missing? What if the ache isn't asking for fulfillment, but for recognition? Try this. The next time you feel that restless craving, don't move, don't reach, don't label it. Just sit, breathe, watch it. Ask, where is this feeling coming from? What if I don't try to fix it? What if I just listen? You may find that the ache transforms, not into pleasure or pain, but into stillness, into presence, into awareness of the very fact that you are. And that in itself is enough. In Buddhist philosophy, this is called tanha, a thirst not just for things, but for being, for grasping, for becoming. But when deeply observed, this thirst dissolves, not because you quenched it, but because you saw through the illusion that anything could. That's the liberation at the heart of this paradox. You are not the seeker. You are not the desire. You are the space in which desire arises and fades. You are the sky, not the storm. And once you see that, you stop needing to chase the object, because the real object was always you. So where does that leave us? Not in passivity, not in apathy, but in a new kind of freedom. Desire still arises, but you no longer believe the lie that it must lead somewhere. You no longer confuse longing with lack. You can feel deeply, want passionately, create endlessly, but now from fullness, not emptiness. Because the paradox of desire isn't that you wanted too much. It's that what you truly wanted was never out there at all. We like to think of observation as passive. You watch something, you study it, you understand it. You assume it was already there, waiting to be seen. But what if observation doesn't just reveal reality? What if it creates it? This is the paradox of the observer that created what it saw. A consciousness so powerful, so entangled with reality, that its very act of looking reshaped the world it tried to measure. It's not just poetic, it's scientific. In quantum mechanics, there's the infamous double-slit experiment. Fire tiny particles, photons or electrons, at a barrier with two slits. If no one observes, the particles behave like waves. They interfere, scatter, form a pattern. But when observed, when measured, they collapse into particles. The act of watching changes the outcome. The observer alters the observed. Reality, it seems, is not independent. It's participatory. But what does this mean outside the lab? It means you don't just perceive the world, you shape it by perceiving. Your beliefs, expectations, fears, and focus don't simply interpret what's happening. They affect what happens, not in a magical manifest your dreams kind of way, but in the deeply human way that your attention becomes the architecture of your experience. Have you ever bought a car, then suddenly seen that same car everywhere? Or learned a new word, then heard it 3 times in one day? The world didn't change. You did. You tuned your awareness to something, and reality began to echo it back. Now take that deeper. If your mind is constantly scanning for danger, betrayal, failure, you will find it. Not because it's objectively there, but because your observation creates the conditions to see it. You behave defensively. You interpret actions suspiciously. You enter feedback loops that confirm what you expect. Likewise, if you believe people are kind, you approach them differently. Your openness invites warmth. Your attention draws out connection. In this way, your inner world becomes a lens that bends outer reality to fit your narrative. You are not a neutral observer. You are a participant, a co-author, a mirror. And this raises an unsettling question. How much of what you know is simply what you've chosen to see? Your identity is built on memory, but memory is selective. Your worldview is built on experience, but experience is filtered. Your truth is built on perception, but perception is biased, emotional, malleable. So where is the line between seeing and shaping? And if there is no line, if the observer and the observed are entwined, then what is reality? Maybe there is no objective world. Maybe there is only relationship between you and the thing you're observing. And perhaps that's the most honest definition of reality. Not a fixed thing, but a dance, a dialogue, a meeting point between what's out there and what's in here. In ancient spiritual traditions, this idea appears again and again. In Hindu philosophy, the concept of Maya suggests that the world is not false, but illusion-like, fluid, shaped by perception. In Zen, the act of just seeing is considered powerful because it acknowledges the emptiness of fixed form. Even in modern psychology, we now understand that perception isn't passive. It's constructed, predictive, interpretive. So what do we do with this? If the observer creates what it sees, then we must take responsibility for what we're seeing. Not blame, not shame, but awareness. You can't always control what shows up in front of you, but you can notice how your looking changes it. You can ask, what am I expecting to find? What story am I projecting? What parts of reality am I ignoring because they don't fit my lens? And slowly, you begin to unhook from certainty. You loosen your grip on what you think you know. You allow reality to become wider, wilder, more alive. Because the paradox isn't a problem, it's a power. The observer that created what it saw isn't a trick, it's a truth. You are not a camera. You are a painter. You are not a bystander. You are a participant. Every glance, every interpretation, every choice of focus creates. And once you see this, you stop asking, what's real? And you start asking, what am I bringing into view? This is not a burden, it's a liberation. It means you can shape your experience, not by force, but by presence, by noticing the assumptions you carry, by shifting the lens of attention, by realizing that the world will always reflect back what you bring to it. Not because it's fixed, but because it's alive with your awareness. And so, the next time you look at the world, at yourself, at another person, at the path ahead, ask not just what you see, but who is doing the seeing. Because that who is not separate, it's part of what's being created. Paradoxes are strange creatures. We encounter them when reason meets its own edge. They are knots in thought, contradictions that somehow feel true. So we wrestle with them. We try to resolve them, contain them, tame them into logic. But what if solving a paradox doesn't lead to clarity, but to collapse? What if the answer is not resolution, but disintegration? This is the paradox of the paradox that solved itself into chaos, an idea so self-consuming that the more clearly you understand it, the more everything else begins to fall apart. Let's begin with what paradoxes are meant to do. A paradox holds tension. It forces the mind to stretch beyond linear thinking. This statement is false. Can an unstoppable force meet an immovable object? To save the village, you must destroy it. The mind races to solve, to fix, to make the contradiction disappear. But some paradoxes don't want to be solved. They want to be felt. They exist not to deliver answers, but to unravel assumptions. Now imagine what happens when you do solve one. You don't dismiss it. You sit with it. You allow it to speak. And suddenly the insight arrives. Both sides are true and untrue at the same time. Your need for neat categories collapses. Your binary thinking dissolves. You no longer live in either or, but both and. And with that realization, something fundamental breaks open. The structure of your mind begins to dissolve, not in madness, in freedom, because paradoxes were never problems. They were doorways. And solving one doesn't close the door. It removes the hinges. It tears down the walls. It exposes the scaffolding you didn't know was there. And without that structure, the world starts to look chaotic. But this chaos is not disorder. It's unfiltered complexity. It's the raw, uncut reality behind your illusions of control. You used to think good and evil were distinct. Now you see them dancing in every motive. You used to think identity was fixed. Now you see it shifting with context, with time, with gaze. You used to think meaning was earned or found. Now you see that meaning was always made by you. This collapse is both exhilarating and terrifying. You see how much of your life was lived inside a box. Rules, definitions, shoulds. But the paradox tears through that. And what remains is everything, all at once, all alive, all uncertain. It's like stepping into a room where every light has been turned on. There's no focal point anymore, no guiding shape, just radiance, just noise, just depth. And so, the paradox you solved doesn't give you clarity, it gives you chaos. But here's where the paradox deepens. That chaos is the truth, not the final truth. The fertile, shifting, living truth. It's the realization that systems break, that logic bleeds, that no concept is immune to contradiction. And that rather than being a problem to fix, this collapse is a homecoming. Because chaos is where creativity lives. It's where new thoughts are born. It's where you stop parroting and start feeling. It's where you learn to trust the groundless ground beneath everything. In science, this resembles the edge of known models, the place where math breaks and new theories are born. In art, it's the moment form dissolves and raw emotion takes over. In spirituality, it's the death of ego, the moment the self collapses and something vast and nameless arrives. And in everyday life, it's when you stop needing to be right and start becoming real. So what do you do with a paradox that leads to chaos? You surrender. You let it disassemble your expectations. You let it fracture your neat little categories. You let it break your mind's need for answers. And then you rebuild, but differently. Now, you don't seek certainty. You seek coherence, not fixed meaning, but moving alignment. Not stability, but truth that breathes. You don't try to put things back in boxes. You learn to dance in open space. This is the final twist of the paradox. It didn't destroy reality. It destroyed your illusion of knowing it. And that destruction, that was the solution. Because chaos isn't the opposite of order. It's what comes after too much order has been cracked open by truth. So let the paradox take you there. Let it dismantle you. Let it melt the masks. Let it strip you of answers. And then, let it leave you standing in the wreckage, alive, alert, awake. Because in that chaos, you are no longer trying to make sense of the world. You are becoming part of its unspeakable rhythm, and somehow in the ruins of understanding, you begin to live. After all the paradoxes, all the mental loops, all the mirrors turned inward, you may feel like you've reached the end of a long, spiraling corridor. But if you're paying attention, you'll notice something strange about this ending. It doesn't feel like closure. It feels like a beginning. This is the final paradox that runs quietly beneath them all. The more you understand, the more you question. The deeper you go into thought, the more thought unravels. You set out looking for answers, and instead, you find better questions. You try to define reality, and reality resists definition. You try to find yourself, and discover there's no fixed you to be found. That's not failure. That's the nature of awareness. You were never meant to tie up life with neat philosophical bows. You were meant to dive in, to let ideas haunt you, to let questions bend you into new shapes. You were meant to grow, not into certainty, but into a richer relationship with the unknown. The human mind evolved to seek answers, patterns, meaning, sense, and yet the deepest truths don't resolve. They dissolve, not into confusion, but into space, into depth, into perspective. Each paradox you've encountered here was never meant to be a puzzle to solve, but a mirror to hold. Some showed you the limits of logic. Some revealed the illusions of identity. Others exposed the fragility of time, truth, desire, or perception. But none of them could exist without one thing. You, the observer. You, the mind willing to look. You, the consciousness brave enough to feel the cracks. And perhaps that's what all of this has been building toward. Not an answer to life, but an attitude toward it. An attitude of openness, of awe, of layered awareness. You begin to see that your thoughts are not cages, but clouds. That your identity is not a monument, but a movement. That the world is not a fixed place, but a phenomenon, shifting as you shift, reflecting what you're ready to receive. If you've made it this far, you've likely realized something even more essential. The deepest shifts don't come from knowing more, they come from unlearning, from peeling back the stories, assumptions, and concepts that once gave you safety. And yes, that can be disorienting, but it also makes space. Space for humility, space for wonder, space for presence. Because to live well isn't to have everything figured out. It's to show up, wide-eyed, mind open, heart cracked, into the mystery. Maybe the mind will never stop asking. Maybe the soul will never stop searching. But that too is part of the beauty. You are not broken because you don't know. You are human because you keep wondering. So let the paradoxes stay with you, not as burdens, but as companions. Let them remind you that reality is bigger than reason. That truth can be wild and contradictory. That meaning doesn't always land in the form of answers. Sometimes it lands in silence, in surrender, in a single breath, where everything suddenly feels enough. And when the next question arises, and it will, don't rush to answer it. Sit with it, feel its weight, let it shape you. Because you're not just someone having thoughts, you're someone being thought by the universe itself. And maybe, just maybe, that was the question that kept asking all along.